What's up, guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to start off with a little bit of background on a can that we're going to be comparing to the LN can once again, further enlarging the chart we are working on. But before we do that, we got to give a little backstory here. And you may or may not remember this one, but we've got a series of single step, so that's, single step, 50-degree angle, included angle, cones, all right, progressively spaced, and then switching to a pocket radial in the distal end. Now we've got a transitional area here where we switch from the 50 to the pocket style of cone, and then just static spaced those guys from there. Now this just got back from being record, well, not necessarily record, but having some modifications made, meaning it was sent out to an 0702 and had some modifications made to what I wanted, because I had previously compared it to my all single step can, and while the numbers came out fairly good, it did seem a little gassy, and I did personally believe that there was a little left on the table here as far as sound performance goes. So I reevaluated from what we found out in that video, and then followed the process to have those changes made. And we're going to go over those changes here and why I thought we should make them. And then we'll see if, in fact, they were a net benefit or not, as comparing to the LN can, which is arguably one of my best, well-balanced cans in the 1.5 and roughly 8-inch length class. So we're just going to go ahead and kick this off by a quick overview of what we already got. So we had single clips across the board, and then we had 200 depth clips on these pocket cones, and then I want to say they were also 200 depth on these single step cones. So if we were to model these up like I have previously done in other videos, we can see that we've got enough chamber area here to go with a deeper clip in these single step 50s. First off, we've got plenty of room in this proximal portion of the stack. So I have had them deepened to 220 thou of depth. Now the pocket cones are remaining at a 200 depth clip. Now when I had previously modeled them up a little bit better, it did look like that some of the gas might be going into the opening of the next cone, okay? Just like this. Not all of it, but a little bit at this 0.5 spacing. So that also is going to mean we're a little restrictive as well, and it was my belief that we should increase this spacing a little bit. Now, of course, any increase in this area means a decrease in these areas here. Now, personally, in my cans, I do not like to have the middle area too tight, especially this transitional area. So that means if I'm going to increase these last 3 chambers, I'm going to have to pull from my first chamber and my second chamber mostly, and possibly a little of my third chamber, but again, I don't really want to. Peak gas expansion happens somewhere in this kind of area right here. So we want to make sure we've got sufficient volume in this area. It takes time for the gas coming out to really start to then move laterally outward, okay? So that's where we stand from the original. The next thing I want to talk about is the back sides of these pocket cones. Originally they have this kind of step thing here before they open up. So if you can imagine a clip about this deep and the gas going across here, we've got lots of gas going here, it's going to come into contact with this area. Now also this step is going to make this area here a little bit on the narrower side, and it's my belief that while I like this kind of shape, I don't really like this protruding step very much. So another modification that I thought would be potentially beneficial is to remove some material in these areas here, some additional material. So if you can imagine kind of going and taking out like from here to like here on each side, and then this area now being a void, an open space, we're going to have an even larger amount of area here for gas to kind of travel through. We're still, in theory, if we want to have any sort of bounce off this area, we can still definitely bounce anything off that area, assuming that even is something that can take place. But now we just have also some more volume in this area too. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I'm trying to decrease the amount of restriction and the flow in and then the vortice back and out of this area. So if you can kind of look, like if you imagine, let's kind of clean this off a little bit here. We'll go back to red. If you can imagine hot gases coming across and then of course coming through the bore and going into this area, they're going to fill up this pocket, and then they're going to want to tumble and vortice back and out. And while you might think we want to keep and hold it here as much as we can, and we do to a point, we also want to then make room for more of this flow into this pocket as well. So it being able to then travel out of here is not necessarily a bad thing. What we just don't want is for it to go out the bore, right? Eventually it all has to go out the bore no matter what. But we do want to have as much go into the pocket or into the cone area, but then also have an easy time kind of traveling and tumbling through. And that is my working theory behind removing any sorts of material from this area. So we've got a host of different things going on to hopefully improve this guy, from changing up spacing to relieving these back areas, and then also slightly deepening the clips in the proximal portion. So all these three changes are going to change the flow rate throughout the can, and possibly the capture and storage rate, or the amount we can capture and the length we can store it, potentially. So we'll find out if this gives us a net benefit versus our LN can, or if it just doesn't end up stacking up quite as well. I'm also hoping to see just a little bit less gassiness on some things like 556 and such. So yeah, I guess now we'll go ahead and talk about those spacing changes. So as far as spacing goes, no changes have been made to the blast chamber area. Like I said before, we're predominantly taking from the front portion, leaving the middle portion alone as much as possible, and then giving to the back portion. There is no more distal, unfortunately, that we can steal from. We've got the minimal amount of rim left here on this last cone, and then we just have the back bore of our cap here over on the right. So we can't make any changes here either. So what it's basically come down to is we've got an interlocking joint on the first cone to the spacer for the blast chamber. So we do lose about 10 thou here. So this new chamber here is roughly 0.625. This next chamber has been brought down to about 636. Now this next chamber, again, typically wanted to avoid having to take from here, but did take some. Didn't want to have to give up too much in these first two chambers, and made this 0.55. And then this one also 0.55. And then our transition remained the same at 0.55. Basically was already kind of at what the minimum was there. You can see we already kind of don't have like a crazy amount of room here, but it's not like it's super tight either. Also, running the deeper clip, we needed to make sure we stayed in line there. So basically, this was the smallest transition that we could really come up with. And then where we wanted to go next was we wanted to then increase these next 3 chambers. So traditional school of thought here is either static all one size or something in a declining nature. I personally like static all one size, but I also ended up coming out with a mixture of things. After measuring what I got back, I kind of just arranged it in an order that I thought would kind of be interesting in my brain to try out. So, long story short, as the gas gets a little bit less dense as we're going through, to me it kind of makes sense that maybe having a little bit more volume and therefore a little bit more time from each tip could potentially be a net positive. So while these differences between these all are really just a stacking of tolerances, I'm going ahead and stack them this way regardless. So the target here was for these to come all out at 0.575. They were returned to me in with spacers, you know, kind of not all exactly the same. So I kind of just looked and saw, you know, what kind of chambers could I build out of what was in here, and without making any modifications or anything. And then, so long story short, I'm going to arrange this in this order here. So this is now added 60 thou, so this is a 560 chamber. And then I'm going to actually get progressively bigger. So this is a 570. And last but not least, a 0.575. So, I mean, we're literally talking 15 thou difference between all these. Not very much at all. So it's more or less still static spaced back here. But I did decide to just go and put them in an increasing order instead of a decreasing order. So that is how things are now set up, and that is how we are going to try out and test it. And we are going to see if this thing kicks butt or not. I'm hoping it does. We're running a bore, very common size bore, 30 cal bore, around 0.37. So right in line there with what most people have. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing is that the tips of these pocket cones are 0.5. It's a little much for 30 cal. I'd like to maybe see them chamfered, like we could cut the corners away. But I did not have that modification done, and sitting here measuring it right now, I'm not even sure there's enough meat in those corners to chamfer them. But that is also a technique when you've got kind of more tip than you wish on the sides to alleviate some of that as well. Other than that, pretty darn happy with how this turned out and looking forward to seeing exactly how this ends up shooting. Really hoping to see some good 300 black and 308 numbers too. So yeah, I guess we'll wrap this one up here and we'll see how she does.